You are listening to This is Oklahoma, hosted by Mike Hearn, telling stories of Oklahomans and those that have made it their home.
Before we get into today's episode, I want to tell you a little bit about our current sponsors, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. As you well know, if you've been following This is Oklahoma, they've been a huge part of this podcast. So this podcast is presented by the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, telling Oklahoma's story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com and follow them on Instagram for daily updates at oklahomahof. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma. Mike Hearn here, your host. Back with another episode down at the Oklahoma History Center today. Back at the Oklahoma History Center. It's been a couple of years since I've been here to do a podcast. I did one with Rachel a while back, which went really well. But I have the director of the Oklahoma History Center with me today, Mr. Trait Thompson, who is a Texan, but I think as the same as I can't really say anything, right? Because I'm not even from America. But you're probably... The words that I get from a friend said that you're an Oklahoman by choice. And obviously you set your roots here, you came to college here, went to ORU and clearly in a great position today. But we're going to talk about the history and how you get to this job and growing up and how your love for history weaves its way through your story, and then you could get presented by this opportunity after working on the Capitol restoration, which I'm sure was a lot of fun, a lot of headache at the same time.
Yeah.
But before we get to talk about that, as we do with these podcasts, we will set some context. So tell us a little bit about kind of your upbringing and where you were born and raised.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be on your podcast. I've listened to several episodes, and you always do such a great job, and it's a thrill for me to be here. I was born in San Angelo, Texas, and my parents divorced when I was about 5 years old, and so raised by a single mother for a few years until my mom married my stepdad. And we moved to Brady, Texas when I was about in third grade. And for those of you who don't know, Brady, Texas is famous for a couple of things. It's a real small town in the middle of nowhere in central Texas. But the first thing is that the geographic center of Texas is in our county. Okay. So we are the true heart of Texas down there. And then every Labor Day weekend, we have the World Championship Barbecue Goat Cook-Off. Okay. And so that our little town of 5,000 swells to about 30,000 that weekend with all the people that come in for that big festival. So those are our two claims to fame. But I grew up in a farming and ranching family. My stepdad his family had been in the area for several generations, and he farmed wheat and cotton, and we had cattle, and so I became a farm kid about the time I was in the 4th or 5th grade. And from that time on, I spent all of my spare time that I wasn't doing school and activities. We were working on the farm, either working cattle or hauling hay or, driving the tractor and plowing and all those things that you do on the farm. And so I'm thankful for that upbringing because it really does give you a great work ethic. Right. And it shows you, I started out probably when I was 4th or 5th grade chopping cotton, which is basically walking up and down cotton rows in the middle of the summer, chopping weeds out of the cotton. And I made $1 an hour. So that was my introduction to good, honest American labor, I suppose. And then, graduated from high school in Brady, a class of 90 people. So it kind of shows you, a very small town. And I decided to come to Oklahoma to go to Oral Roberts University. And a few different decisions led to that. My parents had come to Tulsa for a Christian conference at Victory Christian Center. And I went and toured the campus and really liked it, and then came for a college weekend my junior year of college. And I loved the campus. I loved the professors. I liked the smaller atmosphere, the idea that you could kind of get to know your professors and you weren't sort of like one person in a sea of 100,000 people. And so I went to ORU from 1996 to 2000 and then graduated in 2000.
It is pretty much the most beautiful campus in the state, isn't it?
It's a really unique campus, and I don't think I appreciated it enough. If you love sort of mid-century modern architecture, it's your haven there. Right. And it's all of the architecture has symbolism. At the time I was there, I thought it was just kind of a weird architecture. But now, the more I've grown to appreciate different types of architecture, it really is a unique and fascinating campus. And if people haven't had a chance to go there, they certainly should, because it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. So going then from high school and making the decision to go to ORU, had you already decided kind of like your career path and what you wanted to do?
No, I really had no idea. In high school, I got inspired with history when I was really in high school. Mm-hmm. I had my teacher. I took honors classes and AP classes, and so my teacher had a doctorate, and his name was Dr. Bill Graves, and he was just this fascinating guy. Mm-hmm. I remember he probably weighed 130 or 40 pounds soaking wet. Super skinny guy, really tall. And it was such an oddity to have a PhD as a high school teacher in Brady, Texas. I'm sure, in bigger cities that was more the norm. But he loved history, and he was a storyteller, and he would walk around. I remember one time he was talking about World War I in one of our classes, and I was sitting at my desk, and he's talking about the average life expectancy of someone in no man's land was 10 seconds. So he'd walk around and he counted it down. And then I remember when he got to 10, he came over and he slammed his hand down on my desk. My books went flying everywhere, and he's like, "Mr. Thompson, you're dead." And I was just like, oh, my eyes were as big as dinner plates. But I was captivated with it. And he was also a very hard teacher. I mean, if you made an A in his class, it was because you earned it. Mm-hmm. And so that's what really turned on my love for history. And I thought about majoring in history in college, but I talked myself out of it because I've got a real practical brain, and I just thought, what am I going to do with a history degree? So I thought, I'll be a finance major, because if you know how to use money, then there'll always be a place for you. Yeah. The practical side of me won out. So I was a finance major at ORU, which was great. I loved my classes and my professors, and loved my classes, and I learned a lot. But I never really kind of quite went into that field. Right. And really for, the next few years, it's really, I'm just, you're in your early 20s, you're trying to find yourself, figure out what you like and what you don't like. I went to work for a company, MCI WorldCom, which was a big major telecom company back in those days. And they had a office north of Tulsa. And I worked in the wholesale dispute resolutions department, and I learned all about telecom and all those kinds of things. And I worked with some great people, but the work was just
soul-sucking.
It was so boring, and it was just, the movie Office Space came out in '99, and it really was like that. It was, did you get your TPS reports in? And so I started thinking, this is not the route for me, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. In the meantime, I get real involved in politics, and I just love politics and public policy. And I met someone who had gone to the Bush School of Government at Texas A&M. Mm-hmm. President Bush 41 had put his policy school in his library at Texas A&M University. Mm-hmm. Well, my brother had gone to Texas A&M, and I'd gone to visit him several times, and I just loved the school and loved the campus. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to go to A&M. I'm going to major in public administration. I want to switch careers. I want to get into, more of the public policy side of things. And so in 2005, I went down there and started school. I'd just gotten married a few weeks before, which I don't necessarily recommend. You just get married and start a whole new life chapter, because that's a really hard way to start a marriage. We moved down there. We don't know anybody. It's a whole new world down there. And but I'm going to grad school for 2 years, and I go full time down there for 2 years. And I have some great opportunities while I'm there. The summer in between my first and second year of grad school, I got to intern at the White House, which was
That's pretty impressive.
Fascinating and fun and great experience. And then I graduate in 2007, and I go to work after that for the city of San Antonio in their budget department. And once again, I find myself, I hated it. It was such a, I had managers who I didn't like at all, and they were very demanding, but didn't, kind of there was no training to teach you how to do what to do, and it was just a terrible environment. And so I lasted 4 months there, and I was like, I'm out of this. I've got to figure out what to do. And so I got a job in Tulsa again, got back to Oklahoma, which, what's funny is growing up in Texas, I thought, now I'm in San Antonio and I can live in Texas, and I thought it would be great. But it just didn't jive with me. And when I got back to Tulsa, it felt like coming home again.
Right.
And so we have my wife and I have our first kid when my son was born in 2007, late 2007. And so I get a job with a company called the Persimmon Group. They were kind of a new consulting firm there. And so I'm getting to do more of what I want to do. I'm going to we had a job, a contract in Kansas with the state of Kansas. And so I'm getting to work on that a little bit and some other contracts as well. Ended up getting laid off in 2009 from that job because, the economy.
With everybody else.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
The economy kind of craters, and, the first thing to go is always consulting. And so then I'm kind of at a quandary again. I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? And then my friend Matt Pinnell calls me, and he says, hey, I've got this job with this group called American Majority, and they're teaching, there's a lot of organizations that teach political candidates how to run for office if they're going to run for Congress or U.S. Senate, but nobody teaches school board candidates, city council candidates, and that. And so they were kind of carving out that niche. And I thought, well, this could be fun.
Yeah.
And it was a pay cut, but it was getting more into the line of what I wanted to do. So I worked for American Majority for about a year and a half. And then I get an opportunity to go work for Mary Fallon's political campaign. She's running for governor at the time in her first term. And so June of 2010, I get on with Governor Fallon. And I work as one of her field representatives in Tulsa. Once again, I meet some great people. And through that job, I meet my future boss, Brian Bingman, who was going to be the new president pro tem of the Oklahoma Senate.
Yeah.
And when he was coming in, his policy director was leaving to go work in D.C. And so I interviewed for the job, and lo and behold, I get it. So here we come to Oklahoma City. Yeah. And my wife grew up in Mustang, so it was kind of coming home for her. And so,
do you guys meet at school?
No, my wife and I met after school. Okay. I had been involved in a young adults group at church, and one of my friends at our young adults group had gone to college with Sarah, and she kind of put us together. Yeah. Of course, we hit it off, and we get married. We got married in June of 2005.
Awesome.
So
yeah. So you get the job down here then?
Yeah, so I get the job with Brian Bingman, and great guy. So for 4 years, I'm his legislative director, and I'm his policy advisor in the Oklahoma Senate. Mm-hmm. And this was from really basically the end of 2010 till the middle of 2014. And I absolutely loved it. I mean, it was, you talk about finally finding your niche and finding where you belong. Right. That was where I was. I loved getting involved in the wonky policy details. I got to work on all kinds of interesting projects. I got, tax projects and transportation and corrections and, all of those policy ideas that you study in grad school and you get jazzed up about. And but one of the things that I got to work on was the Capitol. Mm-hmm. And this is all during the time. So right when I first started working there, they have chunks of the building that are falling off. Right. And then they put up the yellow barricades out in front so people don't go up there and get hit in the head with a piece of stone that's fallen off the building. And my boss is pretty passionate about getting the building fixed. Mm-hmm. But the House of Representatives at that time was very anti-bond. And, they didn't want to pass any bond issues. So in 2012, there was a bill that passed out of the Senate, flew off the floor. It passed pretty easy to give, I think, $160 million in a bond issue to restore the Capitol. Goes over to the House, it gets 15 votes. It takes 51 to pass something over there. So it just dies. It goes down in flames. And then the next year, they pass a bill that actually gets passed out of both houses and signed by the governor to provide funding for the Capitol. But it was also tied in with the bill. In the same bill was a tax cut. And somebody sued on that, and the Supreme Court said it's log rolling. You can't have two separate subjects in the same bill, so they tossed it out.
Yeah.
So finally, third time's the charm in 2014. A clean bill passes, a bond bill for $120 million. Okay. And at the time, I really started thinking, I'm passionate about the Capitol. The Pro Tem had put me as one of his designees on the Capitol Preservation Commission. So I had gotten, really invested in trying to get the Capitol fixed.
Yeah.
And so I go and talk to Preston Dorflinger in the summer in 2014, and I say Preston was the director of OMES, and OMES had been tasked with administering the Capitol Restoration Project. For those of you who don't know, OMES stands for Office of Management Enterprise Services. It's the state's administrative agency.
Gotcha.
And I'm talking to Preston, and I just say, "Hey, I've got project management in my background." I said, "I think you're going to need someone on this is going to be the most high-profile state construction project maybe ever, because you've got the legislature in the building, you've got multiple state agencies in the building. So I think you're going to need someone who understands how to work with political leaders, because we had a construction and properties department." And but they're pretty much the guys that are just sort of they're administering the project, but politics doesn't often enter into the case on most of the projects that they work on. I said, this one's going to be a little bit different. This
is a different one. Yeah,
I'd like to throw my hat in the ring for helping with this project in some way. Yeah. And so that later that summer, he calls me up. We interview and we talk and everything. He says, "Well, yeah, I'd like you to come on board and be the project manager."
Yeah.
So I step into a world that you kind of look back in hindsight and you're like, what was I thinking?
He hands you a high-vis jacket and a hard hat, says off you go.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I'd never done a construction project before. I didn't know beans from potatoes about construction. And really early on, my job wasn't to know construction. My job was really to be that hub to clear the way for the construction people to be able to do what they do. So really to interact with the folks in the building. We had an oversight committee, so I was working with the oversight committee to make sure that they're communicated with, that they know what's going on, and to make sure that we're moving the project along. And then I'm handling a lot of the logistics inside of the building. Just if we need people to move from this office to this office or move to clear out a whole wing. And I'm working with the media a lot and keeping the media informed about what we're doing. And we start doing YouTube videos to keep people informed. We form a website, we get a logo, we do the whole 9 yards, because it was really important to me that with this much money being spent and it being the people's house, that the people understand what's going on. And I didn't want this to be a project that was done in secrecy, something that, because there was a lot of misconceptions about the project early on. People thought it was just going to be a remodeling project. Yeah. That we're going to go in and we're going to make legislators' offices nicer and that kind of thing. But at the heart of it, it's an infrastructure project. I mean, everything in that building was failing, from the electrical system to the plumbing to the roof to the windows. This was really about making the building viable and useful for another 100 years. Yeah. And of course, through that process, you're making things nicer. There was a lot of what I call just patchwork quilt design that over the years, people had come in and they'd built an office out into a corridor. Yeah. Or they needed a new door, so they put on a door that didn't match any of the other doors, to the point you had 30, 40, 50 different kinds of doors through the building, all different eras of design. You'd walk into one office area and it looked like 1972, another looked like 1992. And so when you're talking about the state capitol, you want to bring it all together into a consistent design. Of course, you want modern plumbing, modern electrical. One of the big things we had to do was modernize the security systems. And so we tripled the number of cameras, and now we go from analog cameras to digital cameras. We expanded the elevator shafts and put in new elevators. Right. We put in everything from 80% of the building wasn't fire sprinkled before. And so we had to modernize that. A lot of the building wasn't ADA compliant. So we had to go through and do all of that work. So we're talking about making improvements. And then you're also talking about how does the legislature and the building function. The Capitol is a unique building because it's three different things. Mm-hmm. Most buildings are one thing. The Capitol is seat of government. So people have to be able to come to the building, interact with their legislators. The legislature has to be able to do its job. Mm-hmm. It's also an office building. You have to be able to hook up to the internet. You have to have Wi-Fi. You have to have a nice environment for people to be able to do their work. But it's also a museum. It's an art museum. Mm-hmm. And before the project started, there's art pieces of priceless value all throughout the whole building. And so you have to design it in a way and fix it in a way that it serves all three of those functions well. And that was our goal and our job. And so we start out in 2014. We do all of our investigations. We knew early on that the project was not fully funded. We went to Kansas. We talked to them. Kansas had done 10 different bond issues and finally gotten to a $330 million project.
Yeah.
But one of the things that they told us was get your funding up front. That way you can plan it all up front and you can be efficient with how you utilize your resources. Right. So they had construction companies that were kind of coming and going, design and redesign. And there's been a little bit of that in our capital project, but not near like they had. And they told us, if you get your funding up front, we could have saved $50 million in our project. So that was the message. We go back to the legislature in 2016. They passed another $125 million bond issue to get the project to full funding. And that was a game changer for us because now we can execute the full vision, get the whole building where it needs to be. And so we systematically work our way through the building. We phase all of the construction work so that from February to May every year when the legislature's meeting, we don't interfere in those legislative spaces. But from June to January, we go hardcore in the legislative spaces. Whether it's offices, their conference rooms, their lounges, their restrooms, whatever it is, because we have to get their work done to be able to turn it over to them in time for the next session in February. So that's how we phased the work. We initially looked at vacating the building, but our problem became where do you hold the legislative session? And so, do you spend $20 million of precious resources to go retrofit another building like the old armory? Or do you have to rent? I mean, we'd have to rent something like the convention center to have enough space for everybody to operate. So it just became untenable. And so we decided to do it in an occupied building and just phase around the building. And it's hard. There's weird noises, there's smells, there's dust. I mean, the people that have made it through the 8 years of construction of that building, they really deserve a prize because they've had to go through some pretty, annoying circumstances for sure. But thankfully here in February, the project will be finished.
It'll be fully done,
And the whole building top to bottom will have been completely redone. And it's beautiful. I'm so proud of how it turned out. I couldn't have imagined back in 2014 that it was going to turn out as amazing as it has.
And I mean, in the grand scheme of things, you're rebuilding or renovating, making this building safe, like you said, for 100, it's an investment for the next 100 years, or more. And, for you and having that love of history, it's such a cool point to be a part of. You're like, I was a part of this. I saw everything. We did everything. And it's funny you mentioned Matt earlier. When I interviewed Lieutenant Governor Pennell, it was during that time. It was December 2019 when I did the interview with him at his office. And you're right, I walked in, I'm like, we've gone back in time here. It's just like wood paneling everywhere. But it was really interesting to go through, and just kind of see different sections. And we're walking down the hallway, and he's like, this is just a wall right now. Like, this will be opened up. This has just been put up just so we don't have to see or hear too much noise. But yeah, an amazing project. And you're right, you're in the limelight. You're under the spotlight for not just all the legislature, but all the people, right? Because you talk about spending, total, was it $250 million?
Yeah, so total $245 million bond issue. We earned interest and premium on those bonds.
Yeah.
So at last I checked, that the project will come in for about $280 million, which is still less expensive than Kansas, than Minnesota, and several other capital projects.
Yeah. So you had your hands full for 8 years, pretty much.
It was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, but also one of the most valuable things. And I think it will be something that I'll always look at that building and be immensely proud of.
Right.
I had a chance to have a hand in restoring this awesome temple of democracy for the next several generations of Oklahomans to be able to use, to enjoy. You know, the Capitol it's the place where people go to have their voice heard.
Yeah.
And whether it's a rally outside on the steps or whether it's people going inside and interacting with their legislators, I mean, this is the place where people come to have their voice heard.
Right.
And I'm glad that it's going to be around for at least another 100 years. And then after that, it'll be somebody else's responsibility to keep it going for the next 100 years.
No doubt.
It's a beautiful building. It's an amazing building. It's a testament to Oklahomans' fortitude and drive. And you know, we were a young state when it was built, and it was the pride of our state. And I still think it's the pride of our state.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, I get to see people take photos of it. You know, we got the Guardian on top and just some amazing drone shots and everything else. It's great to share that to the page and stuff. And like you said, now know that it's been done properly. You know, and spent money to do it right, and taken a long period of time, but it will last. But doing all this stuff, there's obviously, and you know, I think what you put in your bio is that you're working yourself out of a job. Yeah. Right. You're like, I mean, this is a great project to be doing, but I'm not going to have a job at the end of it. You know, it's not like there's a seat in an office waiting for you.
Yeah, you know, and I had some conversations with some folks at leadership at OMES about transitioning to another role within OMES, and nothing had really firmed up at that point. And I kind of always had it in the back of my head that I would like to be an agency leader. But, you know, I was just kind of being patient. Along the way, I was getting some job offers from, you know, some different folks. And even in the construction industry, people, you know, I had a few offers to go work for some different companies. And, you know, I was just kind of biding my time and not getting in too much of a hurry. I didn't want to leave the project too early.
Yeah.
When I left the project, I wanted to make sure that it was going to be everything was going to be in a good place, that whoever came after me could pick right up and just basically land the plane.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what happened. You know, I left the project in January of this year, of 2021, with about a year left to go on the project. And by then, all the hard decisions had been made.
Right.
All of the really, really difficult and complex work had been done. It was then just a matter of someone coming in, and OMES assigned a gentleman named Paul Haley to complete the project. And Paul has been an architect in the construction and properties department for years and years, and he's phenomenal, and he's doing a great job of finishing out the project. And I'm still somewhat involved because, you know, of course, I still know everybody over there, and I still go over and tour the work. And occasionally people will call me and say, well, Trait, what about this? And, you know, because I've got 7 years of the history kind of in my mind. And people will ask different questions, say, no, this was what we were doing. This is why we did this. This is why we designed that way. And so I'm still involved to a small degree, but I'm proud of that work. Like I said, when we were going through the project, all the time we would find places where workers who had worked in different areas had written their names, had written the date. And even when the building was being built, we'd pull open a wall, there'd be a piece of aluminum ductwork, and somebody had written their name and the date on that.
Yeah.
And the reason that they do that is because they knew that building was going to be around.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They knew that somebody at some point was going to find their name, that their name was going to live on somewhere, and that if you want to write it on any building, write it on the Capitol, because they know that, you know, 100, 200, 300 years, it's still going to be there.
Yeah.
So that's the thing about the Capitol, is it's constant. And to have had a hand in that, I'm just immensely proud of that, and feel very privileged that I got to be a part of it.
No doubt. So during this time, then you're coming, like I said, you're leading up to the end of 2020. Mr. Blackburn announces that he's done. He's done all his work. He wants to step down and take some rest of well-earned time off, right, and retire.
Yeah.
Have you guys been friends before this? Like, how does that connection come to you thinking, I'm going to step right across the street and start working right here?
So I had first met Dr. Blackburn when I worked in the Pro Tem's office in the Senate, and Dr. Blackburn had been advocating, one of the big things they were advocating for is the OK Pop Museum in Tulsa.
Yeah.
And he was trying to get funding for that, and I remember meeting with him in the Pro Tem's office and having those discussions, and Pro Tem Bingman was supportive of that idea, and I thought it was a great idea to be able to highlight, our rich popular culture history in the state. But then over the years, we interact in different ways. I might see him at a speech, or we might work together. And then when the Capitol project comes, we work really closely with the Historical Society, because it's everything from one of the first things we needed was old photographs of the construction of the building, so we could see how it was put together, and doing our research to figure out how best to fix it. So all those photos are here in the archives, and we're working with the folks over here in the research department. We work with the SHPO department, which is a state historic preservation office. One of the things that we wanted to do was make sure that we are, even though we weren't required to use the Secretary of the Interior guidelines, we wanted to do that to the best of our ability, because it's a historic building. We want to take care of it. We want to treat it right. So we're working with the SHPO department on that. We had different projects, like in 2017 was the 100th anniversary of the building. So we work with the Historical Society to plan festivities and activities that celebrate the building.
Right.
And so we have different opportunities over the years to work together. And so when Dr. Blackburn announced that he was retiring, I had a meeting with him, and I just said, hey, I'm really interested in this job. Of course, he knows by then, I'm passionate about history. In fact, one of the proudest moments of my life, I think, was a reporter had called over here to Dr. Blackburn's office and wanted some to talk about the history of the Capitol. And Dr. Blackburn tells him, call Trait. He knows more about that than I do at this point.
That's
I'm just
awesome.
like, what?
Yeah.
I'm like, no way.
Right.
So I just feel immensely proud about that, because if there's a Mount Rushmore of Oklahoma historians, Dr. Blackburn is one of the
front
first
and
faces
center.
on. So I had done tons of research on the building, and even done, I have never felt like I can live in a place unless I know its history. Okay. To me, it makes me feel connected to that place, even though my family didn't grow up here, even though, my lineage is not a direct part of it, of the history. I can say happily it is now.
It is now, yeah.
But I can't feel like I belong unless I know the history of a place. So I've always been really into Oklahoma history and learning the history, and it's a fascinating history. But I go and talk to Dr. Blackburn, and I say, listen, if I applied for this job, do you think I would have a shot at it? Because, I wanted to see if I would be taken seriously, or if it was, no, you need a little more experience in X, Y, or Z. I'm not an academically trained historian. I didn't know if that's what the board might be looking for.
Yeah.
And he said, no. He said, I think you would be, really well considered for this. He said, your experience in running this massive project on the state capitol, your experience in state government with working in the Pro Tem's office, he said, I think you would have skills that they would find valuable. So, I put in my application and just kind of wait to see where things go, and ended up getting interviewed by a few of the board members. And next thing I know, last November, they're calling me into a board meeting to say, you're going to be the next director. And I really feel like the dog who caught the car at that point, because I'm just, I wasn't sure what to expect about this whole adventure. But I I could not have found a better fit.
Right.
I love the mission of this agency to collect, preserve, and share Oklahoma's history. I love the people that I get to work with. They're passionate about what they do. I mean, this weekend at Honey Springs Battlefield, people are giving up their weekends to be out there. We're doing a reenactment. Staff that don't even work there are going out there to help out with that. It's just the kind of passion that you see from the people in this agency for what we do. And so I feel very, very fortunate to be a part of it.
Yeah. What, I guess that transition period, right? And you mentioned before we started recording that you got to spend some time with Dr. Blackburn before he did, retire, and driving around and just, picking his brain and being, shadowing him really, right, for that amount of time.
Yeah, I started January 1st of this year, and he didn't retire till the end of January. And it was great to have that month with him because he just kind of moved into the office next door to here. And, he was very respectful. If people came to him, he'd say, well, Trait's the leader now. You need to go talk to Trait. So he was very respectful of that. But we traveled all over the state because we have 26 museums and sites across the state. Yeah. We have everything from historic homes to battlefields to forts to museums. I've got a working bison and cattle ranch in Pawnee. So we've got a little bit of everything all over the place. And so we were traveling and we would just be having these great conversations. We'd talk about history. We'd talk about movies we liked. And it was really the first time that I'd ever had a chance to just have an extended amount of time with him. Right. And just one-on-one time. And we just had a blast. And I realized that we have this really good rapport with each other, which is why I asked him to co-host the podcast.
Yes. Yeah, which is awesome.
So it's been great, and we still talk all the time. Yeah. He's still involved in things that we're doing here, more on a volunteer basis now. But he's got different projects that intersect with some of the things that we're doing here, and I'm really thrilled and thankful to have that relationship with him.
26 sites. That's a lot of diversity, right? A lot of different things going on, and like you said, cattle ranch.
It is, and we're spread across the state. I've got a site in Veneta, and then all the way down diagonally to the southwest in Altus, we have a museum. We've got a site, an affiliate site in historic Fort Supply near Woodward, and then all the way down to the southeastern part of the state in Fort Towson, which is almost to the very corner. And all points in between. And we're really diverse in what we do. It's funny, the things that the purchasing requisitions I have to approve sometimes, because it's like, well, can you approve David to drive to Minnesota because we need a sheepdog? Because at Hunter's Home we have a living farm. Yeah. And so we've got sheep and we needed a sheepdog. Yeah. Can you approve so and so's got to drive to somewhere and pick up a load of hay? So we're very diverse in the history that we present, and it's African American history, it's Native American history, it's of course the history of the pioneers and the settlers who came to this state, it's politicians, it's it almost runs the gamut. In Spiro, we've got a prehistoric archaeological site from Spiro Mounds and the Mississippian culture. So it's a little bit of everything, and it does. Thankfully, we've got great staff at those sites who operate them, and we're working to. I've got a plan that I want to do to improve those sites and make them as visitor friendly as possible. Yeah. And so, really what we need to do is just get the word out more. Yeah. We need to make sure that people are aware of the Oklahoma history that they can experience in their area. So,
is there anything, like I said, you've only been in this position since the start of the year. Is there anything that stood out to you? And no doubt you've learned so much about Oklahoma history that you didn't know. Is there anything that really stood out to you or just shocked you, that why don't more people know about this? Why don't more people visit and kind of...
Yeah, there's a couple of things, and I could say something about every single site, but a couple of things stood out to me. First of all, Spiro, like I talked about just a minute ago. But people don't understand that pre-European, Spiro was one of the four main cultural centers of that Mississippian culture, and there were others. One was near St. Louis. There was others, a couple others. One in Georgia, one in Alabama.
Yeah.
But Spiro was most likely one of the major sort of religious sites, because when in the 1930s, when they started excavating one of those mounds, which was a group of people who shouldn't have been doing it, but they found artifacts from all over the country.
Yeah.
They found copper from up at the Great Lakes region. They found conch shells from down in Florida and that area, and then all kinds of other artifacts. And at the height of civilization there in Spiro, there were probably 10,000 people living at that spot. Now, you go out there today, you can't imagine it. It's sort of out in the middle of the nowhere, and it's by the Arkansas River. But it was a thriving, advanced civilization. When you go out there, and I encourage everyone to do it when you have a chance, go out for one of the equinox or the solstice walks. Because our interpreter, Dennis, out there, he does a fascinating job of talking about the history. But then when you see the sunset, you can see it set directly in line with those mounds. Now, you're talking about a people that you would think, well, they weren't advanced. They weren't scientific. You got to know what you're doing to make that happen. I guarantee you. So they did something similar at the new First Americans Museum. They built the mound there, and they lined it up. And there was a team of scientists and architects and engineers that made sure that everything was lined up perfectly. And our prehistoric brothers and sisters did this back in the 700s and 800s.
That's amazing.
So it's a fascinating site, and it's a fascinating people, and it's a history we don't talk about very much here in Oklahoma. The other one that I find fascinating, and I mentioned it a minute ago, is Honey Springs Battlefield. So in the Civil War, you have it's really the major battle of the Civil War here in Indian Territory. Now, Honey Springs is located a few miles north of Chakota, Oklahoma, near the all-black town of Rentisville. And Honey Springs was a place where it's exactly what it says. It was a spring, so there was ample water available. It was a Confederate supply depot camp there. And in July of 1863, which that may sound familiar because there's a couple other important battles that happened that month as well. Gettysburg and also the Vicksburg happened right around that time period. But July 17th of 1863, the Union general decides he's at Fort Gibson, and he knows that the Confederates are amassing to come attack Fort Gibson. And he decides before they can join their forces together, he's going to come attack ahead of time, sort of a preemptive attack. So he marches down with his troops. But one of the most fascinating things about that battle is the majority of combatants in that battle were not white. They were Native American, and they were black. And so the 1st Kansas Colored Volunteer Infantry Regiment, who had been based out of Fort Scott, Kansas, they were the very first black regiment to see action in the Civil War. Now, that's fascinating.
That's very fascinating.
Because we all are conditioned to think about the movie Glory, right? We think about the 54th Massachusetts, which was I'm not negating the importance that they served. 2 of Frederick Douglass's sons served in the 54th Massachusetts. But the 1st Kansas was formed in 1862 as a militia. They see action later that year in the fall of that year in Missouri. So they're the very first black regiment to see action in the Civil War. Then, after the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, they are mustered into the United States Army. They come down to Oklahoma because they guard a supply train down to Fort Gibson. And so then they fight at the Battle of Cabin Creek. They fight at the Battle of Cabin Creek, which is on their way to Fort Gibson. It's kind of a skirmish, but they proved themselves then. The big question back then was, could they fight the same as white people could? Would they exhibit courage? Would they fight the same way? Now, of course, that question to us is absurd. But back in those days, that was the main question. Now, most of this regiment is made up of former enslaved people from Missouri and from Arkansas, a few from Oklahoma. But So they come down. So July 17th, 1863, there were 9,000 troops involved in this battle at Honey Springs. And they're the turning point. They're the center of the line. They're the ones that caused the Union victory at Honey Springs.
Yeah.
Now, that battle happens one day before the 54th Massachusetts does their major assault on Battery Wagner in South Carolina that's portrayed in the movie Glory.
Gotcha.
Most people don't know this stuff.
You have no idea, yeah.
And it's a history that I want to make sure that we get out there and that we tell this history because it's important. This was Honey Springs was probably the most culturally diverse battle in all of the Civil War.
Yeah.
The end effect of the battle was that it turned the tide of the Civil War in Oklahoma and returned control of Indian Territory to the Union forces for the rest of the war. But very, very important battle that I hope that we can do more to highlight.
Right. And then, like you said, there's stories like this at every center, right? There's something of significance and there's something that people need to learn. Other than going to the individual places, is there like a central hub that people can go to, website or whatever?
Yeah, people can always go to our website, which is okhistory.org, and we've got all the information of all our different sites on there, and we've got tons of resources on different aspects of Oklahoma history on the website. If you want to learn about Black or Native American history or just general Oklahoma history, we've got lots of resources for folks out there. And then the other, great way and this is particular for people that are doing primary research, we've got the Gateway to Oklahoma History. And on this, we've got literally millions of pages of documents, whether it be newspapers or documents or photographs, and people can go out there and keyword search what they're looking for. And so I use it all the time for different research. I mean, you can go look at newspapers from the 1920s, from 1930s, from even earlier than that, and then all the way up. And so it's a great resource for people that are wanting to do their own research into Oklahoma history. And then, of course, we have a podcast that is our OHS podcast. It's called A Very Okay Podcast, and that's where we tell. We're trying to highlight all these stories that people may not know about. And so we started recording the podcast, and Dr. Blackburn and I are co-hosts of it, and we typically have a guest on that's talking about whatever the issue is. So that's another way we're trying to share Oklahoma's history as well. But I would encourage people, go out to the actual sites and the museums. And then this building we're sitting in right now, the Oklahoma History Center, this is a great place to come and just get a sort of good overview of Oklahoma history. And I guarantee you'll come here, you'll learn something you didn't know before, you'll see something you've never seen before, and you'll want to come back because you probably won't be able to do everything you want to do in one sitting.
100%. Yeah, I to that point, I interviewed Sam Anderson in this building, who wrote Boomtown. Awesome dude. But you guys, he came down to give a speech, I think. And one of the ladies at the time was like, you can record a podcast with him if you want. That's totally fine. I was like, yes, thank you so much. So I had 30 minutes with him, which was really cool. But thanks so much for taking the time. I know you're a busy man. I really appreciate you sharing the history of the state and continue to do it. Hopefully you can find more time and you and Dr. Blackburn can record more than one episode a month, right? Which is the struggle, I know, because it's not easy to sit down and get 3 people together when you're all busy. But I'm sure people really look forward to that and kind of just, using that information and just hitting the road and listening to the podcast or traveling around the state. And there's so much out there. There's so much more that people can do. It's just finding a place for them to go do it, for them to find the place to find those things to do, if that makes sense to people listening. Can't get my words out. But, we have such a great state, and I catch myself saying that because I believe that I am now an Oklahoman. We are Oklahomans now, aren't we? And we live here for a reason. We love what we do. And like you said, after 10 to 15 years of kind of searching for what you wanted to do, you found your place. You found your the place that you really enjoyed doing, things you love to do. I'm sure you still use that finance degree, right? And just all that stuff.
When you're running an agency, I mean, it's all about finance, and it's all about making sure you're judicious with your resources. So the degree helps out a lot. And but thanks so much for having me on today. And you do a great podcast, and I've been a fan for a long time. And Thanks so much.
Yeah. Where can people follow you personally?
Yeah, so for me, I'm active on several social media platforms. Facebook, I kind of have locked down that I just family and close friends, but Twitter's open. So at Trait Thompson, TraitThompson on Twitter, and same on Instagram. And would love to interact with folks out there.
Awesome. For everyone listening, I'll post those links in the description, and we will catch you next episode. Cheers. This podcast is presented by the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, telling Oklahoma story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com and follow them on Instagram for daily updates at oklahomahof.
Thank you for listening. We are inspired by those around us and hope that you are too. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review so we can keep telling your stories. For more great Oklahoma content, follow This Is Oklahoma on Facebook and Instagram.